Hey, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and this channel is teaching tips, tools, ideas, and resources for new college instructors, as well as academic or alt-ac advice. The past 2 weeks, I've been preparing for the fall term with some topics tied to getting ready for that moment. And so now here's a new one, and this one is a bit different. Yes, it'd be great if you plan this in advance, but it can also be things that you tweak in the semester depending on how your students are doing with their writing. Because this is 5 ideas of how to include a draft of a piece of writing in your class in a way that's not really time consuming for you to have to grade and get feedback on, but it's still gonna be really helpful to students. So if you've never assigned a draft version of an assignment before, but you've been curious about potentially how to do that without, again, putting too much on yourself, here are 5 potential avenues to try out. So the first one requires no input on your part because it's a self-review that the students complete themselves. Okay, so this could be either optional or mandatory. It can be worth no points, participation points, points towards the assessment, extra credit, it really depends on how you want to approach it. But in this case, what you do is you have potentially a rubric for your, let's say a paper to make it easy. You have a rubric for your paper. So what you do is you say, okay, in 2 weeks in advance of the deadline for this paper, you're gonna do a self-review. And what you're gonna do is you're actually gonna use a rubric and grade your own draft, okay? So you're gonna have to literally annotate your paper saying, okay, well, criteria 1, here's why it's level 3, exceeds expectations. And over here, I'm meeting criteria 2, but I just realized it's a bit vague. So it's probably gonna be like meets expectations, the second level. Over here, I didn't even think it was criteria. It's missing completely from the paper. So this would be the low level, right? Lower than expectations. And so on and so forth, right? So if you have a rubric, right, or a general sense, a guide of like, okay, here is how I'm gonna assess your paper. I want you to assess it first with your draft, okay? And now that you have this assessment, go forth and revise your paper before you submit it for the final submission that's gonna be graded in 2 weeks. Okay, so doing a self-review using a rubric or a guide. That's option 1. Now, option 2 is doing a peer version of this, right? So same thing. You all have your rubrics or your guides. You're going to exchange your paper with somebody else, and they are going to assess it using the rubric in that same way, in that same annotated format. And so their peer reviews it, give it back to each other. And again, you can grade this, you can not grade this, it depends. Probably you want to grade it, at least participation, to make sure students are doing it and giving good feedback, juicy feedback for their partner. But again, this is no work on your part other than making sure that, when you're grading the peer review, like, yes, they did answer all the prompts. Yes, they did, have specific notes. But again, very little work on your part because it's the students who are gaining the skills of assessing writing and offering critical but helpful feedback. And of course, then they have the 2 weeks again to strengthen their final submission. The third option is to scaffold a rough draft into your units. So maybe you're teaching and you have 3 units in the course and there's gonna be 3 projects at the end of each unit. Well, then maybe unit 1 is a rough draft of unit 2, okay? And so in that sense, you're grading the rough draft, but it's because it's part of a major unit, right? So maybe the unit 1 is only worth 10% or 15% of their course grade, and then unit 2 was worth 30, right? Double the amount, because now they have your feedback on this first one, and they're gonna improve it. Maybe they're gonna add something to it, a second layer to it in unit 2, and then they're gonna submit that. So this is a way of giving them feedback on the rough draft, but again, you're not making more work for yourself because it's just naturally in the 3 units. It's not in addition to those units. So this can take some consideration of, okay, like what do you expect? Like what are the goals of each of these units? Because again, maybe the first unit is, okay, you're gonna create a text-based version of this assignment, and then I'm gonna give you feedback on that. And in unit 2, you're gonna improve the text-based version based off of my feedback, but you're also gonna add a visual element or a video element, an audio element, whatever the case may be, right? And so that's a way of also getting some rough draft feedback to them. Now, another one that takes more time on your part, but it can be very helpful, is to do individual conferences with your students. So in this case, you set aside half an hour maybe, right, for each student to meet with them. And so maybe it's like 25 minutes and then a 5-minute break in between, all your meetings. But you have them bring a draft with them. And again, like, let's start assessing this. And that might be with the rubric, Or it just might be, hey, let's read it together. And I'm going to pause momentarily and give my thoughts on each paragraph. Or if there's a sentence that strikes me as needing a lot of work or it's really strong, I'm going to point that out to you. And it's your job to take notes while I'm speaking so you can improve the draft before you turn in the final version. So yes, this is a lot more time, right, on your end, but it's not in the sense of you have to write down all the feedback, like you're involving them in improving their work, right? It's a collaboration effort between you and your student. So this can be really helpful to build a bond with your student and also, again, to provide them feedback to strengthen their work without doing too much extra work on your behalf. Because usually when you do individual conferences, you cancel a class period or two to balance out that time. And so this could be an avenue as well if you find it one that interests you. And then one more option is to do the optional submission of a rough draft. Okay, so in this case, it's a bit riskier because if you ask, okay, if you turn in a rough draft by 2 weeks before the date, I promise to give you feedback by a week before, right? And so you might have no students submit, 3 students submit, or 30 students submit to you. So you don't really know how much work you're gonna get when you do this option, but you can tweak it depending on how busy you know you'll be. So maybe it's you can submit the first page, and I'll give you feedback on that. Or you can submit like whatever element of the assignment that you're most concerned about, and I'll give you feedback on it. Or it can be you can submit a whole draft, right? Or it might be you must submit a whole draft, right? Because you want to push students to give you the full version, to work on that so far in advance that they have it already 2 weeks in advance. That can be strong for some students. Some students won't want to bother with that, so you like to get fewer papers in that sense, but you will get the full thing to work with, right? So again, there's catch-22s here, but you can consider how you want to offer this optional submission approach. And again, if you do want all students to submit to you, but it's optional, you can do extra credit. It can be a portion, not the whole paper. It can be 1 week advance rather than 2. But again, it makes more work for you if the goal is to get everybody to submit. So you just want to see what your parameters are going to be for this approach to seeing a rough draft from your students. Right? So I have a whole playlist about teaching literature, teaching writing. So I'll link that below in case you're interested. That was what I did. I taught undergrad literature and writing. But I'll see you next time with a new video. I hope fall goes really well for you. And if you have any ideas for videos for the future, feel free to comment those in the comment section below, right? And I will see you next time.